Hiya. So today I'm going to take you through another dialogues essay. A couple of people have been asking for a couple more of these, so I've got an applied ethics one today. So the creation of designer babies goes against Christian beliefs about the value of human life. That's our title. This is one that I'm pretty sure I made up. I don't think this is a question that AQA have set, but looking at the spec of what they can ask for dialogues, I think this is a fair enough question. So I've done an answer. I've done it as a level 5 model. So I'm confident that this would get level 5. Let me take you through how I've done it. Okay, so I don't really think it's necessary to do an introductory paragraph. So my first paragraph, I'm trying to get straight into the meat of what I want to talk about. So Christians believe in the sanctity of human life, which means they see human life as set aside and made sacred by God. Therefore, human life is more important and precious than other kinds of life. So I'm just starting off with a clear bit of AO1 understanding there, showing that I know what Christians mean when they talk about sanctity of human life, what makes human life special. It's created by God, therefore it's not like other kinds of life. The sanctity of life principle has major implications for this statement because on the face of it, the creation of designer babies could be seen as a violation of this principle, especially if embryos were destroyed or significantly altered. A bigger issue, however, could be that designer babies may undermine Christian understandings of what it means to be human. So if there's more than one problem you can see with an issue, it's a good idea to kind of tee them up like this. So maybe the less significant problem followed by the bigger problem. Part of a Christian understanding of the value of human life is likely to include the view that human life is created in the image of God for a relationship with God, and therefore can a baby designed by humans rather than by God be made in the image of God? So by putting a rhetorical question in there, this is still AO1, but I'm just starting to introduce the idea of what my argument is going to be. So I'm setting out what the problems are. Okay, next paragraph. Biblical teaching about the value of human life suggests that designer babies are not compatible with Christian teachings. Now, obviously the Bible doesn't say anything about designer babies, but you have to look at what it does say and you have to apply that accordingly. So we've got it here. The book of Jeremiah says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." That's relevant because that suggests that God has a plan for every individual before they're conceived. Designer babies interrupt this process and could therefore be seen as going against the will of God. The book of Genesis states, "So God made mankind in his image." And this raises questions about to what extent a designer baby would be made in the image of God. Many Christians would be concerned about playing God by taking control of the process by which children are conceived and born, because these two teachings suggest that the value of human life is inextricably linked to a relationship with God as the creator of all life. But has a designed baby been created by God or by humans? So again, this is largely AO1, but I'm introducing these questions that need to be answered. Oh, gone too far. Right, so now I go to natural moral law, because of course this is an ethics dialogues. Looking at this issue from the perspective of natural moral law, it seems clear that designer babies cannot be allowed. If an embryo was selected from amongst several for genetic modification, this would immediately violate the precept of preserving innocent life because the other embryos would be discarded. So with any kind of IVF or genetic modification, if you believe that an embryo is a human life, which natural moral law tends to do, then anything that involves those embryos being discarded or destroyed is not going to be okay. So we can get there very quickly. Natural moral law holds that the right to life begins from conception, and this has become a central ethical teaching of the Catholic Church. Furthermore, the process of creating designer babies would also violate the primary precepts of reproduction because the embryos would be created outside of sexual relationship, which is seen as the natural order of things. It's also important to note, so I'm again just kind of drifting into AO2 here, that many would see designer babies as contrary to an ordered society, because having children who are designed with specific qualities and traits could eventually lead to a two-tier society in which some people are considered more valuable and useful than others. The creation of designer babies could also be seen as a failure to worship God by taking on his powers of creation and circumventing God's power to create humans as he sees fit. So now, having done quite a lot of AO1, I'm going to engage with some AO2. I'm going to point out difficulties. I'm going to be critical of these views. So I do it here. Let me just highlight the bit. So it starts here. A major problem. So however is a good kind of word to signal that you're going into AO2. A major problem with the natural moral law perspective is that Aquinas could not have foreseen the ways in which medical science would change and develop. Many Christians today consider natural moral law's approach to sexual ethics and its insistence that life begins at conception as outdated, knowing what we now know about the development of embryos and fetuses. It could be argued that natural moral law is disproportionately weighted towards the rights of embryos and ignores the potential of technology such as designer babies to alleviate human suffering. So that bit there, everything from however down, is AO2. So I'm trying to get a balance. And then I switch again and I start to look at situation ethics. So again, in this paragraph, there's going to be a blend of AO1 and AO2. So from the top of the paragraph, however, not all Christian perspectives would necessarily condemn the creation of designer babies. Fletcher's situation ethics is person-centred, which means that rules are not as important as the needs of people. Situation ethics is also pragmatic. So you can see I'm using keywords out of that situation ethics content, which means that in any moral situation, the good for actual persons is more important than the good for any potential persons. Therefore, the issues of the rights of embryos are not relevant to a user of situation ethics because embryos are not seen as persons. Fletcher was open to the idea of scientific research and potential modification of human beings to cure disease and improve the human race, as long as the motivation for doing so was agapeic. This view has clear strengths. So you can see this is where my AO2 starts because I'm commenting and I'm critically analysing it. This view has clear strengths because situation ethics is much more adaptable than natural moral law and can therefore see the potential in new technologies whilst insisting that all actions must be motivated by love. For many, though, this is not enough of a safeguard because what is considered loving by one person might not be by another, and in matters of human life and death, it is better to have strict rules in order to protect persons who cannot protect themselves. So you can see what I've done there. I've pointed out a strength and a reason why people might be on board with it, but then I've flipped to a problem, which is good because you're showing that you understand multiple perspectives. You get good AO2 marks for doing that. A key question to ask when considering the statement is why parents might want to have a designer baby, because this may have a significant impact on how a Christian may respond. A lot of people forget to do this in their essays, particularly when we're talking about applied ethical issues. Not all situations are the same. The reason why people might want a designer baby or an abortion or even something like capital punishment, they're going to vary. So the response will vary too. It depends on why you want it. In many cases, designer babies are saviour siblings whose umbilical cord cells or blood may be used to treat an older sibling with a serious illness, potentially saving their life. This seems to fit well with the sanctity of life principle, which makes it clear that human life should be protected and preserved wherever possible. It also seems to fit well with the natural moral law primary precept, of preserving innocent life. However, the principle of double effect would rule out the possibility of a saviour sibling because it would be wrong to do a bad action involving the destruction of unsuitable embryos to bring about a good result, the saving of the older child's life. Furthermore, a situationist would make a completely different decision in a case where a designer baby was to be a saviour sibling, rather than a case where parents wanted a designer baby for purely selfish or cosmetic reasons, because it cannot be argued that creating a child with enhanced abilities is agapeic. It may be beneficial for that individual child, but it widens inequalities in society, which is in direct contradiction to the teachings of Jesus. So I've tried to unpack this idea that not every situation is the same by using situation ethics and saying well, you know, if people were doing it for reason A, a situationist might be for it, but if it was reason B, they'd be against it, because ultimately situation A and situation B are completely different. You can do that, and it gives you good content to explore. So now I'll go to my conclusion, and you can see it's quite long. My conclusions do tend to be long. Overall, it seems clear that in the majority of cases the statement would be true. While some Christians may accept designer babies in a small number of cases to act as saviour siblings, even this might be worrying for those who believe all human life has intrinsic value from God, rather than simply instrumental value. If a child is only born as a source of treatment for a sibling, is that child really valued in their own right as part of God's creation? So I'm using a rhetorical question here to do a bit of AO2. And I'm almost doing a little bit of a callback to what I said in the first paragraph, as a lot of this has to do with ideas about being made in the image of God, which is really, really central to Christianity. Many more Christians would contend that designer babies undermine the value of human life, because creating a child as a means to an end seems very distant from the sentiment expressed in Jeremiah about God's special relationship to all humans. None of the arguments in favour of designer babies in general are strong because of the potential negative consequences. Social inequality, children being loved only for what they could do rather than who they are, very clearly go against the key principles of Christian ethics, and therefore I would argue that only in very rare and specific cases would designer babies be aligned with Christian views on the value of human life. So you can see what I've done there. I've brought it to a conclusion. I've come down on one side or the other. I've given the possibility that there might be some exceptions, because there almost always will be exceptions with whatever you're talking about, but I've come to a clear judgment, and they like it when you do that. In your conclusion, if you just kind of say, well, some people think this and other people think that, that's going to hurt your AO2 mark, because it's going to be like, well, you haven't really engaged with it and you haven't come to a justified conclusion, which is what they want you to do. Okay, so this was about 1,200 words, which is plenty long enough. I did write this in time conditions, but I type quite fast. If I was handwriting it, I probably would have done a little bit less. So like I've said before, don't obsess about the length of your essays. They don't have a specific word count that they're looking for. They will just credit whatever you write that is good. So just aim to write as much good stuff as you can in the time. Get in a good mix of AO1 and AO2, and you'll be absolutely fine. All right, you got this. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.